My name is Maury Edwards, and I'm a member of the board of the congregation. Before I get into my announcements, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on former Duwamish lands given over in the Treaty of 1855, the Point Elliott Treaty, of which the terms were never fully honored. We're a Universalist Unitarian community. We're here to discover what is good, true, just, wise, lovely, and holy, and what these things require of us. We bind ourselves to walk together in the paths of love, to grow our own souls, and to stand against anything that would diminish the human spirit. We hope you can find something in our service that leads you into that better way of living. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to those of you who are visiting for the first time. We're honored that you've chosen to be our guest this morning. Please don't feel obligated to contribute to the offertory when it arrives. After all, you are our guest. We also hope you'll stay afterward and join us for refreshments in the north room, right over here, right out that exit to the right. Following the service. That's a great opportunity for you to talk to members and get to know our community. I have a few announcements this morning. After the service, I invite you to explore our spotlight tables. Today we're featuring Casa Hill's ministry team, the Holly House Process Survey, and Poinsettia dedications. You'll notice our giving tree. We've already received many gifts for our giving tree, and today is the day for the bright green olive crest gifts to be delivered to the giving tree. Next Sunday, December 8th, is the final day for all other agency gifts. Please bring your new unwrapped gift to the beautifully adorned tree in the foyer. We thank you for your kindness and generosity. We really have a wonderful week coming up with concerts, classes, book clubs, and more. And I don't want to take all morning talking about these, but I strongly encourage you to look in the bulletin, and we hope to see you there during the week. More details and events can be found in your bulletin and on the posters around the campus.
Good morning, all. I'm Marilyn Mayer, so I've been a member of this church for about 15 years already, and I just want to thank you for being here. I'll be helping out with the service a little bit today. To start off with, I just want to thank John for this incredible performance. He's not going to be giving it during the 11 o'clock, so you all have a special treat this morning. He produced the music in conjunction with the Climate Action Ministry and Youth. We had done a number of performances over the last several years, and he either produced the music entirely on his own, which is extraordinary, and in some instances changed the lyrics, but I think you can agree that the stunning photographs went beautifully with the music, so thank you, John. I'd like to introduce our featured speaker today. It's Reverend Michael Dowd. I also want to acknowledge his wife, Connie, who is sitting in the audience, his partner, and they will be here both for the 9 o'clock and the 11 o'clock service and afterwards. So, Reverend Michael Dowd is a best-selling eco-theologian and pro-science, pro-future evangelist whose work has been featured in the New York Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and on television nationally. His book, Thank God for Evolution, was endorsed by 6 Nobel Prize-winning scientists, noted skeptics, and religious leaders across the spectrum. Michael and his wife Connie, who in her own right is a science writer, evolutionary educator, and fellow climate activist, have spoken to some 2,000 groups throughout North America since 2002, including 500 and more Unitarian churches. Their work has been featured on the cover of the UU World twice, in 1997 and again in 2006. Michael has delivered 2 TED Talks and a program at the United Nations. He's also conducted an acclaimed online conversation series, The Future is Calling Us to Greatness, and is currently recording a host of post-Doom conversations, of which you'll have a taste today. And I will also note that at the 2016 General Assembly, UU, Michael and Connie were honored as UU Religious Humanists of the Year. They've been to a number of UU churches this past year, and we welcome them very much. So at this point, if we could rise and sing together our affirmation is in your order of service, and possibly on the projector as well.
Unitarians are sometimes challenged by the word God, so let's just use the word life and speak to life as if life could speak back, because life is in fact speaking back in all the various forms of life. Thank you, life, for this day. Thank you for filling us with air and allowing us to breathe and to digest food that sustains us, for work that can in turn be a blessing or a curse to the larger body of life and to the future. May we here today be inspired to accept what's real, to sense what's emerging, and then to be a blessing to all those we come into contact with, and to do so in a larger than human context. May we remember all the people within our own congregation who suffer and struggle, anyone who perhaps has died recently, any celebrations, birthdays, and what have you, anniversaries. And most of all, may we feel our interrelatedness and interconnectedness with all of life, and in so doing, be a stand for the future. Be a stand for a just, healthy, and sustainably life-giving future, even in the midst of sometimes feeling like that's impossible or that's beyond our reach, or that we have such corruption that we no longer have the confidence. Let us still not be despairing, but to do the great work that we can do, knowing that it's great work to be done and be unattached to the outcome. Amen. And I'd like to read a meditation quote from my great mentor, Joanna Macy. This is a dark time, filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in the larger body, it's natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel, or the anger or fear, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings.
May the fire that has illumined the universe since the beginning and lit up the stars ignite a flame of possibilities in our hearts and minds today. Connie Barlow, thank you.
Without what hands and trees to clear the air.
John seed, an invocation really. We call upon the power which sustains the planets in their orbits, that wheels our Milky Way in its 200-year spiral. We call upon this power to imbue our personalities and our relationships with harmony, endurance, and joy. Fill us with a sense of immense time, so that our brief, flickering lives may truly reflect the work of vast ages past, and also the millions of years of evolution whose potential lies in our trembling hands.
If we could join together now in singing Anthem of the Earth. It was written by John Chmaj, and I think we have lyrics that we can join along.
You do, and since I've written this and you don't know the melody, we'll play it once for you so you can hear it, and then we'll sing it twice. If you want to rise in body or spirit. No. We'll listen to it first and then we'll sing it twice together.
Good morning. First of all, your photos are unbelievable, and your playing is unbelievable. You guys are awesome, all three of you. Thank you. Yeah, let's get So I'd like to speak briefly this morning on the subject of post-doom inspiration. Post-doom inspiration. Honoring our grief, empowering action. First of all, in order to understand what is meant by post-doom, it's really helpful to understand why most of us avoid doom at all costs. And what I mean by doom is the emotional experience that most people have when they realize that the secular myth of perpetual progress is not, in fact, the truth. That throughout the 20th century, those of us who were born and grew up in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even in the 80s, most of us had a sense of perpetual progress. The secular religion of everlasting expansion and growth and complexity and wealth and all the kinds of measures of progress. And, the space age, and I don't know about you, but for 12 years, from 2000 roughly until 2012, my worldview was essentially from the caves to now to the stars. I had a Star Trek vision of the future. I'm now rather embarrassed by that because I think it's totally diluted because it doesn't understand energy and the limits of energy, especially dense, concentrated energy that we find only in petroleum and in coal and natural gas, but it's not in the air. We'll never have renewables that provide that concentration. So industrial civilization is in fact already several decades into contraction, but most of us don't know how to see that because we haven't stepped back and looked at human history. So that's what I'd like to do very briefly this morning, is offer the big picture, because doom, it turns out, is the midpoint. Most people think it's the end. That's why we avoid it. We think that if we allow ourselves to feel despair or depression, we're going to stay that way the rest of our lives. Well, it turns out that's not the case for 98% of the people. Most people don't do that. Most people experience doom, depression, despair. It reminds us, as the Joanna Macy quote, of our profound interconnectedness and relatedness, but more importantly, grief. The measure, as John Macy says, the measure of our grief is the measure of our love. We wouldn't be feeling grief if we didn't love, we didn't care. And so I see doom as the midpoint between denial and regeneration. That's what life does, regenerate. It's compost. It's taking what's died, what's broken down, what's collapsed, what's no longer working, and then new life emerges from that. It's the fundamental dynamic to at least this biosphere, this ecosphere, and probably throughout the universe, wherever life occurs. Certainly bacteria life, most astrophysicists now think is quite likely. Whether it becomes complex or not, maybe the conditions need to be right. But let's just focus here. Turns out that regeneration will occur with or without us, even if we go extinct in the next 100 years, which, believe me, is possible. I mean, we could last another 1 million or 2 million years before an asteroid or a supervolcano or something takes us out. But no mammal our size lasts more than 3 to 5 million years. It just doesn't happen. For very good reasons, biological and ecological reasons. So whether we last another 50 years or another 500 years, we're going to go extinct sometime in that time range, most likely. And life will regenerate, Earth will regenerate. In fact, one of the things that gives me hope is on a 100-year timeline when the whole history of the universe, 13.82 billion years, is compressed into 100 years just to make it easier to get our heads around. Humans have been around, Homo habilis, walking upright using stone tools, the last 2.8 million years, the last week on a 100-year timeline. Homo sapiens, speaking in symbolic language, where words point to what they can't capture because that's the nature of symbols, the last day. If the whole history of the universe began at 1 second after midnight on January 1st of the year 0, and right now is December 31st of the 99th year at midnight, just about to go into the 100th year, humans have existed, Homo sapiens, the last day. And we lived more or less sustainably. We lived in a pro-future way from midnight on December 30th until about 11:20 p.m. And those 97% of our history, we lived more or less sustainably. We lived in a pro-future way. And so, from that perspective, we realize that there are some things that we understand. So doom is the midpoint between denial and regeneration, with or without us. And post-doom, well, let me back up. To get to doom, usually we have to go through the Kubler-Ross stages of grief. Most of us do. Denial, anger, bargaining. You know, if we all just switch to renewables fast enough, and if we just elect the right president, and if we, the Green New Deal, and I'm not saying anything negative about these, but the idea that that's going to save industrialism from the consequences of our actions, that's the diluted piece. And so, doom is the midpoint between denial and regeneration, and we usually go through the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And then we really feel the grief. And the reason we avoid the doom door is because it says over the top, WASF. And we all know what that means. We are so... But if we allow, this is the paradox, if we allow our hearts to go through what one of our friends and mentors, Paul Chmaj, talks about the next stage beyond acceptance, which is finding the gift. When we allow ourselves to go through the post-doom doorway, and that's when we realize it's not the end, it's just the midpoint, then we see these spheres of gratitude and inspired action. Action not from fear, not in order to, but action because we love and we are passionately committed to our communities and the other species and the watershed and the climate and every other thing, but the activism comes from a different place. So post-doom is the space that opens up when we remember who we are. That's one of the things I loved about the visuals. We are not separate from nature. We're not separate from the universe. We are the universe after some 13.8 billion years of evolution now becoming conscious of itself. We are literally an outgrowth of the universe in the same way that apples grow out of an apple tree. You can't be alienated from reality. You can feel alienated if your thinking is not aligned with reality, but you can't be alienated. We don't survive without the microbiome inside of us doing what they do, and the trees doing what they do, and the plankton doing what they do, and the other species that sustain us. So we are profoundly interrelated and interconnected. So post-doom is that place that opens up when we remember who we are, when we accept what's inevitable. We don't fight it. That old 12-step prayer. Life, let me accept the things I cannot change. The courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Turns out peace of mind and heart and inspired local activism require accepting and not fighting against what's truly inevitable. And there are many things that we can say confidently that reality, whether you use mythic language like God or the goddess, or whether you just say reality of life, has been telling us through evidence, through scientific evidence. And it turns out some of the things that are inevitable is that unsustainable civilizations at some point aren't sustained, meaning they end. And we now know from human history, from 11:35 p.m. on December 31st until now, the last 35 minutes on a 100-year timeline, we know of about 115 to 120 unsustainable civilizations that became great, and then their own greatness becomes their own undoing, and then they collapse. And then there's a dark age. And then another civilization becomes great, and it overshoots the carrying capacity, it wipes out more trees and the soil, and it goes down. We see that over 100 times. And we actually have historians that have spent a lifetime studying side by side the patterns. Turns out that unsustainable human-centered civilizations, which is not the same as life-centered cultures. See, when we're life-centered, when we're ecocentric, when we measure progress and well-being by how well the soil and the forest and the water and the life of the other species are doing, that's the key to long-term sustainability. That's the key to living in a pro-future way. That is, the way that you're living now is a blessing to the future, not a curse to the future. Turns out human-centeredness, anthropocentrism, when we think it's all about us, is one of the defining characteristics of unsustainable civilizations. That's why the idea that we're going to be able to transition industrial, global, capitalist civilization and have it become sustainable is not, if you ever watch The Matrix, you're living in a dream world, Neo. It's not going to happen. It can't happen because we understand the dynamics. So again, accepting what's inevitable is accepting that contraction is already in process. In fact, there are 4 questions that I think typify the insanity of our times. These 4 questions, just the fact that many people take them seriously and everybody doesn't know the answer, reflects how out of touch with reality we have been. The first question is, does God exist? To ask the question, you know you're already living in an unsustainable civilization. You know that your notion of God is already trivial, impotent, and completely otherworldly. Nobody would say, does the biosphere exist?
Does the ecosphere exist? Duh. So any notion of the divine that doesn't include what the air, water, soil, and life are telling us, evidentially, is a suicidal, ecocidal notion of the divine. I consider the theist-atheist debate to be one of the great collective insanities of our time. You've got millions of people debating whether or not God is real or whether or not God exists, when the one real God, namely reality, personified or not, we've been treating as an it that we think we can exploit, rather than a greater thou that we need to honor and respect. Turns out every sustainable culture for which we have evidence, again, 97 to 99% of our history as a species, related to the living world as a greater thou, not a lesser it. That's why there has never been a market economy in the history of our species that didn't self-destruct. Because market economies tend to treat the soil, the water, and the life upon which we depend as mere commodities. The definition of sacred is it can't be bought or sold. It's more important than you, more important than we. So, accepting what's inevitable is accepting that we are already several decades into contraction. And the idea of does God exist is crazy. Think nesting dolls, Russian nesting dolls. We would never say, does life exist? Excuse me, sir, do you believe in life? No, we don't need to believe in life. In fact, that's the thing. Sustainable cultures didn't believe in anything. Western anthropology has taken us down this totally dead-end path, thinking that the indigenous peoples and the Africans before they were brought over as slaves believed in spirits. They didn't believe in spirits. They related to the water, the soil, the tree, that tree over there. They related personally. Turns out personification is what our brains do. That is, we give human characteristics to what's more than human. Gaia is not the goddess of the earth or the spirit of the earth. Gaia is a personification of earth, which is inescapably real. The oceans. Poseidon wasn't the god of the oceans or the spirit of the oceans. Poseidon was a personification of the incomprehensibly powerful and capricious seas. I mean, could you imagine how insane it would be if you walked into a room and two people were debating, does Uncle Sam exist? Well, of course Uncle Sam exists. No, Uncle Sam does not exist. What would you think? You'd think they don't get it. Uncle Sam is a personification of the U.S. government, which is inescapably real. So, does God exist is one of the first insane questions that typifies our unsustainable culture. Second question, will civilization collapse? Of course, we don't have a single example of 115 to 120 civilizations, city-based, human-centered civilizations, every one of them has collapsed, not one exception. So we are already, but the thing is, will civilization collapse is a question about the future. It ignores the fact that we are already 35 to 40 years into collapse. That's what the Rust Belt is. The Rust Belt is catabolic collapse. That's we've overextended what we can afford to maintain, and now we're eating ourselves to death. That's what unsustainable civilizations do. Those that aren't wiped out by, a volcano or something. So of course industrial civilization will collapse. We're already into the process. And it turns out, this is one of the things that's really revelatory. It's like, oh my God, when I learned this, I was like, oh smokes, this makes sense. Is that the fundamental ecological concept and theological concept is carrying capacity. There's a limit to how much we can take from the living world and a limit to how much waste we can exude to the living world before the systems break down. It's known as carrying capacity. In theological language, it would be grace limits. There's a grace limit that if we exceed the grace limits, we lose the grace or potentially lose the grace of that relationship. Europe had achieved population pressure. They were already overshot the carrying capacity of Europe. And so the soil was being washed away, the forests were being decimated. And then the New World was discovered. And of course, it was fully inhabited by indigenous peoples. That's why I'm glad that Unitarians honor that fact at the beginning of services. It was fully inhabited. But from the European perspective, the indigenous savages weren't making use of the planet. Notice that. Indigenous peoples and African peoples before they were brought over related to the land in a way that was basically personal, relational. And religion, when it's doing its job, helps us relate to reality. Science helps us understand reality. But religion hasn't been doing its job for hundreds of years. I used to say religion is asleep at the wheel, but that's not strong enough. Half of religion is gagged and tied in the trunk, and the other half of religion are in the back seat cheering on the psychopathic politicians that are driving us over the cliff. So, does God exist? Insane question. Any notion of God that doesn't include what the biosphere is telling us, what other species are telling us, what the climate is telling us, is an ecocidal, self-destructive notion of the divine. It's not about beliefs, it's about knowledge and experience. Is civilization going to collapse? No, it's not going to collapse. It's been in collapse for 30 years. And we understand that process. The most difficult time, coming back to my thing about carrying capacity, is if you're born and you die in expanding times, carrying capacity surplus, more than enough energy, more than enough resources, life is good. Progress is undeniable. Of course, it's interpreted in a human-centered way, not the living world, but nonetheless, the sense of progress is inevitable. If you are born in contracting times, because typically it takes about twice as long to become great as to collapse. It's known as the Seneca Cliff. That is, it takes about half the time to collapse as it did to become great, most civilizations, and empires too. And so in the collapsing time, which usually takes a century or two, if you're born and you die in that process, regress is inevitable. It's a fact. Everything's regressing. Every decade, things are getting a little worse, a little harder, a little more difficult, a little poorer, until you bottom out, and then there's a wealth that's not available in the peak, but that's a whole other topic. I'll discuss some of that on January 7th. I'll be doing an evening program on January 7th, Tuesday here. But the most difficult time emotionally is when we're born in times of carrying capacity surplus, and in our life it shifts. And then we live in carrying capacity deficit. But we have the expectations and the institutions that reflect limitlessness. My great mentor, William Catton, calls it the fundamental predicament of humanity, which is that the Europeans who discovered this world used all these resources, and because the germs, the bugs that were often distributed by dirty blankets, wiped out 90% of the indigenous populations here, so most Europeans didn't have to interact with them, it appeared to be an uninhabited continent, full of trees that Europe hadn't seen in 1,700 years, in terms of the size of the trees. Animals of every kind, food of every kind, plants that they'd never seen, fruit. And so the sense of carrying capacity surplus that expanding, and then when we discovered coal, oil, and natural gas, all that energy, which North America is really rich in, turns out we ship the mindset of carrying capacity surplus all over the world. So that the people of India and China and Bangladesh and everywhere else expect to, because that's what they're being sold by the media, that they're going to be able to live like good middle-class Americans in the not-too-distant future. It's insane. We would need 10 planets of resources to provide that much material and absorb that much waste. So that fact that we live in a world of carrying capacity deficit, yet we have the expectations and institutions and mindset of carrying capacity surplus, is the fundamental predicament. It's not a problem that can be solved. It's a predicament that we now have to deal with, we now have to live with, we now have to adapt with. So, coming back to the theme here, post-doom inspiration. Post-doom, again, doom is the midpoint between denial and regeneration, with or without us. Post-doom is what opens up when we remember who we are, when we accept what's inevitable, when we honor our grief, and when we invest our time and our energy and our money and our resources and our hearts in what is pro-future and what is soul-nourishing. So let me spend the last few minutes talking about what is pro-future and soul-nourishing. One of the things that we can all do, is find those places where our joy and the world's needs intersect. Our joy and the community's needs. There's an exercise I used to do with groups where I had them take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle, so you got two columns. And on one side, you list all the things that light you up, that give you joy, that give you a sense of energy and happiness and fulfillment, things that you're good at, things other people tell you that you're good at. You list it all. Top of that list, you put my great joy. Then on the right side, you list all the things where you feel the world's needs or your community's needs. Like not just where you intellectually know about what's needed, but where does it hit you? Where do you feel it? Where do you feel anger? Where do you feel depressed? Where do you feel especially compassion? Where does your heart break over something that's happening in your community or in the world? And you list those. And then what you do is you pay attention to your heart. You don't have to call it prayer or meditation. Just pay attention to this part of your body. There's neuronal tissue, neurons. There's thinking neurons around our hearts. So when we pay attention here, and what you're trying to do is play mix and match. Where are the intersections between what lights you up, what gives you joy, what gives you energy, and what the world's needs are, or your community's needs as you feel them? And those places where your joy and the world's needs intersect, your joy and the future's needs intersect, that's your calling, that's your mission, that's your vocation. That's where you can be a blessing to others in a way that blesses you. So I encourage everyone to do that exercise. Because when we accept what's inevitable, as I said earlier, that allows us to be engaged in climate activism. It allows us to be engaged in here's another thing that I encourage, is LESS. Less energy, less stuff, less stimulation. All of us can do that, and it nurtures our souls to do that. You know, drive less, fly less, eat less meat, eat no meat. Anything, it's not going to save the world. We're going to still hit the wall. But it's going to help save your soul. It's going to nourish you deeply, and it's going to be an inspiration to your neighbors and friends who, I believe, from this moment on, every season, not just every year, every season, there'll be several million people that are ready for a post-doom conversation that weren't ready last year. Because there's not only denial, like climate denial, like there's no problem here, you know, whatever. There's also functional denial, which is when you get that we're going to hit the wall anyway, like you're not going to spend your life freaking out about the fact that we're in contraction. About the fact that our kids and grandkids are going to have it harder than us and harder than our parents did. That these are actual facts. But here's the thing. What most people don't know is in collapsing civilizations, we see 80% of the best of humanity show up. We do see 20% of the worst of humanity show up. But most people actually come from a place of compassion. In hard times, we sacrifice for each other, which is the essence of meaning. We find our lives most meaningful when we can be a contribution to others. And there's always going to be people who have it more difficult than you. So for you to be a blessing to them is going to nourish you in the deepest possible way. So we can all downshift. Less energy, less stuff, less stimulation. One of our favorite authors, John Chmaj, wrote a book called Collapse Now and Avoid the Rush. Collapse now and avoid the rush. See, we can all do that. Also, Joanna Macy talks about loving something, learning something, letting go of something, laughing at something, and then legacy, carry something forward. Love something green, love something light, plant trees. Connie, my wife, is one of the main point people in North America for assisting trees, including coast redwoods, because they're actually not producing babies in California anymore. The drought and the fact there's less and less fog. So all the climate scientists and the foresters who pay attention to this stuff know that coastal redwoods are going to be needing to be in the Pacific Northwest. So she's part of a group of people that are helping to make that happen. In fact, if you're interested in that, talk to her afterwards. We can all do that. We can take seeds of trees, because trees have been doing this, native trees, for millions of years. Every time the glaciers come and go, all the trees and plants go south and then they come back. It's just that now climate change is happening so rapidly that unless humans assist native trees and plants in migrating, thousands of species will go extinct. The difference between thousands of species of plants and trees going extinct and surviving is going to depend upon what humans do in the next 50 years. It's holy work. Even if we go extinct in the next 100 years, it's holy work to further other species' survival. Love something, green plum. Build topsoil. Build a greater sense of community. So love something, learn something. We can all learn something that then we can also apply it to legacy. Passing on what we know, passing on what we can do, skills to young people. I encourage everybody over 50 to pair with somebody under 30 and teach them what you know. Mentor. Love something, learn something, let go of something. We can all, as I said, downshift and use less energy, less stuff, less stimulation. And then laugh. It's so important to keep a sense of even dark humor, gallows humor. It's so vital that we're able to laugh at ourselves and our species. One of the things that gives me hope, just so you know, is that, remember the 100-year timeline? On a 100-year timeline, worst case scenario, which is we have World War III, it goes nuclear, all of our nuclear power plants melt down, humans go extinct, and we take 90% of the other species with us. Worst case. By early February of the 100th year, that's 12 to 15 million years from now, life will have fully regenerated. That gives me hope, because we're not going to see worst case scenario. We're just not. And even whenever we go extinct, Connie's money is on raccoons to be the next creature that develops technology that comes to know that it knows. And I mentioned John Michael Greer already. He actually agrees. He thinks the descendants of the raccoons will be the second technological species. And he thinks that the third technological species is going to be the descendants of the crows 100 years from now, 100 million years from now. And 100 million years from now, fossil fuel will have been replenished. And because the crows are already into flying, they're going to get to the moon. And the great blessing to the crows, because it's a humbling, is when they get to the moon, they're going to realize that some now extinct Earth species beat them to it. And maybe they don't have a favored relationship with whatever their crow personification or crowification of the divine is. And that will be the humbling that they need. I share this simply as one way of keeping our hearts light in challenging times. And I'll go into a lot of this on Tuesday night, January 7th. One last thing, which is we are staying at the home on Whidbey Island of Tara Anderson and Tom Buxton. Tom Buxton and Tara used to be members here. Tom's right here. And so if you were here long ago and knew Tom, make sure you look him up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if I could ask the ushers to come forward for the offering. Read just a short reading before our Fix Up the Planet. Unitarian Universalists know that the story of evolution and creation is not yet over. Evolutionary change at all levels, cosmos, planetary, life, culture, will continue into the future, and we humans bear responsibility for how the story will continue on Earth. In support of our own evolving congregation, the offering will now be given and received.
All around, it reaches in the sea, lying on the ground.
among the words, love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, thus do we come.
May we leave this place embodying the very best of the Unitarian Universalist tradition, of the liberal tradition, celebrating our differences and being a blessing to all those with whom we come into contact in a way that's also a blessing to the future. Amen, aho, and blessed be.
interviewed Joanna Macy, and she said she was part of a ritual in Iona where there was a whole several days talking about the crucifixion of earth. And then on Easter Sunday, she was like, what's resurrecting? The recognition that we are not separate from all those photos, that the cosmos is our larger body, that what's being resurrected is what the indigenous peoples had, which is that ecological self, that our larger body, our larger self is that. So thank you both so much.
We want to thank Ethan and Jenny and Lori and Al and John especially for an incredible performance gathering. So, and Michael, of course, and John. Thank you. Join us, please, at the Northridge.
So we have a, we can actually, so we're just
We have a soloist, so keep it playing.
Okay. Yes, okay. Steve is doing the sound today. We can play him.
Okay.
I'm sure glad to do that. Should I get him in a bigger mic?
Ralph knows how to generate royalty.
Yes.
So, you're standing in the emergency room.
Ethan, you were great.
No, I was impressed considering, because you got this sticking up there.
I have to test it. I still screw it up. So the Halloween show was the most popular. It was like videos. So I got it all set. I timed out everything. I stopped watching the film and counting out the bars and my got it all squared away. They're all like perfect. Eric, and so we get he has double all the vocals and we're still playing. Like, well, I was supposed to sing because John Chmaj says I should. There seems to be some video. It was funny, hilarious. So it does look silly if you're right. Well, the 9 o'clock is a bit semantic. Everybody's but sorry, the level of rock. I love it. Ooh, that's I'm gonna go do something. Yeah, this is my
Yes.
I dance too, but my fingers are busy.
Uh-huh.